Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast, This Week in America. In the critically acclaimed The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge by Bernie McAuley, an American POW, Larry, returns home after the Vietnam War, only to find that his life has changed drastically. He's now a single father of two. The family ranch that he grew up on is about to be sold to someone else, and the career as an airline pilot is in jeopardy because of his recurring nightmares. An old high school and college rodeo team member, now a reporter, enters the picture for the first time in years. Dakota had every guy on the team, including the coach, chasing her through those early years, except Larry, who had more important goals than some barrel rider. Bernie was born and raised on a cattle ranch in eastern Montana, 2 summers in Glacier National Park, backcountry as a packer. Began a 38-year career with airlines in Minneapolis, transferring to Great Falls, Montana, where he spent his time fishing, hunting, and team roping in the shadows of Sawtooth Ridge and Bob Marshall Wilderness. He transferred to Seattle in 1973 to work in operations, where he became familiar with MAC operations, military air charters. Then retired in 2005, later joined Griffin's school staff in 2006. The Shadows of the Sawtooth Ridge is Bernie's first published book, and Bernie McAuley joins us on This Week in America. Hi, Bernie. Welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Love the story that you tell in The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. I want to talk about your background there. I love what you've gone through. I'm a city boy, so anytime we can talk about in the country, this is fascinating to me. Experiences in the backcountry. Talk about those. What were those experiences that shaped who you are as a person and certainly as a writer?
Meeting people, but packing back up into the wilderness, spending a lot of time by yourself. Usually in those days, we were supplying the fire lookouts in the backcountry. And of course, then again, meeting people along the way and so forth, and mostly talking to your mules in some respects or another.
And I imagine
learn how to kind of daydream to yourself
yes.
And kind of talk with yourself.
I imagine after a while you're convinced that the mule is talking back to you. Does that happen after a while that you swear you hear the mule talking back to you?
Believe it or not, I believe that's true sometimes.
See? I wasn't making that up. After a while, I believe that happens when you're talking to an animal like that. And then 38 years in the airline industry. Talk about what that was like working. And this was the sort of the early days of aviation. What was that like?
It was new to me, coming off of, as I said, horseback out in eastern Montana. It was a whole new situation for me. I'd never flown too much up until that particular time. And meeting different people along the way. It's people tell stories. You learn a lot about people themselves. A couple of people I ran into along the way. Bennett Cerf. I don't know if you
of
have
course.
heard it from him or not.
Yes.
Very interesting gentleman to talk to. Paul Harvey, another one. Very interesting person to talk to and enjoy. The Lone Ranger's sidekick, Jay Silverhills.
Jay Silverhills, Tonto.
Used to meet, yep, Tonto. Used to meet him every Sunday night in Montana. He was working on building a college, Indian college, up at a place called Rocky Boy. And later on, President Carter was one of them I met along the way. Interesting gentleman. Mike Mansfield, who was ambassador to Japan. I spent a lot of time with him playing penny ante poker on the counters in Great Falls, Montana on a dead Sunday night. But you run into a lot of people along the way, and you run into a lot of stories. My son, for instance, commutes out of Palm Springs to San Francisco and Seattle. He flies for Alaska Airlines. And airline people are different. They're a different breed, but they also follow their dreams. Myself, for instance, I'm still love the ranch. I look back at my former character myself, and I'm happy with it. It was a good life.
All of that and a great storyteller on top of that. And it sounds like a biography should be something that you should be working on in the future with all the people and the experiences. We'll talk about that later, future writing endeavors that you're thinking about. The book we're going to talk about here is The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge by Bernie McAuley. That's MCAULEY. His website is BernieMcAuleyBooks.com. You'll find the book wherever books are sold, Amazon.com, for example. You'll find it at ReadersMagnet.com as well. This touches on the life, as I mentioned, of Larry, what he went through. There's a lot of background there about veterans, what they went through, what they're going through now, their family members. It's a book that tells such a charming, motivational story. What was the inspiration in writing this book?
Pandemic.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But,
Okay.
Going back to meeting a lot of veterans along the way that have suffered PTSD earlier in life, and I don't think, in reality, we as a nation really thought of that earlier in our earlier times, or after Vietnam, for instance. It's just finally started to come to light. Going back to, say, my uncle, for instance, who fought in World War I, I asked him one time, and he says, I came home, I forgot about it, I went back to farming. But in reality, as his wife once told me, he never did forget about it. He always lived with it. So it's part of that. It's part of life in our times. We go back to the 70s, for instance, and there's so much happening in those days with the man on the moon, for instance, our Watergate with Nixon, our just life in general, divorce, for instance, losing one spouse was becoming a very common happening at that particular time.
Yes. You take us back to the 70s, gas shortages as well. That actually goes back for the younger people to the 70s when we went through something like this before, and high gas prices. You take us back to that time. And in talking about the PTSD, you do such a wonderful job in presenting the problems and trying to deal with that. And in this case, Larry, as I mentioned, an airline pilot, could lose his job because of recurring nightmares. So it was a real situation that Larry had to go through. How long did it take you to write this book, to put this story together?
Almost a year. Just when you, as again, going back to my original time on a horseback or talking to the mules, excuse me, going back to it, you sit down and you write and you write and you write, and then you go back over and look at it. My worst part, my worst habit was I lost a lot of grammar through the years. You get in the airline business and you kind of have a skinned down grammar when you're talking with people.
Oh, yes.
And it's short, let's put it that way. But I went through some of the stories of some of the more veterans that I've known that went through this, and they've talked about it, and they've went to counseling on it and so forth. And a lot of them ended up getting divorced, and unfortunately, there's a few of them that not only getting divorced, but they're taking their own lives, which we're starting to find out now, more so now than we had in the past.
Yeah, and the statistics are alarming, and you touch on that in a very compassionate and informative way in Bernie's book, The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. I mentioned you need to write a biography, an autobiography, with all the people that you've met. What are you working on now? Are you writing more?
I have just finished another book. It's if you remember, there's Larry has a daughter named Joni.
Oh, yes.
Which is in this book here. And the second book is about Joni, who decides to follow in her father's footsteps. The only difference is that she graduated from the Naval Academy, where her dad or father graduated from a state school. And anyhow, it's her brings us up to Desert Storm and 911 quite a bit of her time and her loves and her whatever comes along with it, her experiences in the Navy. So I'm anxious to see it on in print. Hopefully it'll be out within the next month or so.
Oh,
It's called Beyond the Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. It's Joni's story.
we'll be looking
And
forward to that. I was going to ask when that's coming out, but that's going to be out here very soon. So look for that as well. Best place to look for all this information on Bernie is his website, BernieMcAuleybooks.com. That's McAuley, BernieMcAuleybooks.com. You're really proficient as a storyteller. Where did that come from? Were there any associates, family members, friends that developed this in you? Because you really tell a great story. To be a good writer, you need to be a storyteller, and you are that. Where did this come from?
My grandfather, who had a third grade education, believe it or not, managed to build a ranch, 14,000 acres out there in eastern Montana. And his stories about the different homesteaders that had come and gone, and he ended up incorporating those homesteads into his place over the years. And he used to tell some good stories, and I was really, it was good stories to listen to and enjoy with him.
It's
And
interesting.
we used to sit out there in the middle of the pasture watching lightning strike all around us, and he'd point out someplace. He says, yeah, that used to be my homestead up there at one time, up there in Larb Hills. So he was a great storyteller. And I loved it. I enjoyed it.
You spent
And
what?
Yeah,
I was just going to say, you spent a number of summers there. What did you have, like a 14,000 acre ranch in eastern Montana? What was that like to spend summers there in nature? And then knowing about your grandfather and the stories that he was telling, that has to be something that memories you'll cherish for a lifetime.
yes, it will. I tried to get my mother to write them down, but she never did. She had a lot of stories also, but we all have a story. We all have a story from our past. Many of us sit around a fire at night, and pardon the express, we drink beer and we tell stories.
Yes.
Sometimes they're long stories, and sometimes they're short.
Well, they got better and longer as the more beers you drank. So that's exactly how that worked there. And all of a sudden the sun's coming up and you're thinking, where has the night gone? Our guest on the program is Bernie McAuley. That's McAuley. The book is The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge, book available wherever books are sold. Send it to Amazon. His website, Bernie's website, BernieMcAuleybooks.com. The new book will be there very shortly. In the intro, I talked about the time at Glacier National Park, spent a couple of summers there. Talk about that and the type of work that you did there.
Glacier Park is normally called the crowning jewel of the national park system.
Yes.
I believe it's more beautiful than Yellowstone Park. I did most of the backcountry riding. I've seen most of the backcountry from the back end of a horse. It's beautiful. It's a lot of it brings a lot of stories to mind in regards to the park itself. It's a great place to visit. I understand now they're restricting some of the visits, and you're having to put in for a lottery system. But it's a great place. It really is. I still feel the best way to go either by horse, or in some cases, instead of driving in your car, take the red buses that go through the park, because those drivers probably are the greatest storytellers in the world and can tell you a whole lot about the park that you would never get otherwise. So, and it goes back to the hotels go back to the Great Northern Railway. They used to bring people out and from the East Coast, and they'd start to visit at East Glacier, where they'd get off at the train at there. But it's a beautiful place. It really is.
Well,
I miss it. I miss it, and my wife and I've been back once, I think it is, and I went through it. And it was fun just walking across the street from the hotel where we were staying at and visiting with the horse concession people.
Yeah, just the people and the stories that those people are able to tell. Bernie McAuley, our guest, the book, specifically we're talking about The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. I mentioned this before, but you set the table well. You have these characters you develop, but you take us back to that time period, the Vietnam War, airlines, ranching, scenes from each of those you bring out in the book, The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. Why did you do that? Why do you take a sort of a time capsule back there and you used all of that in the story? Why did you decide to do that?
Because I wanted to make it a continuing story, and bringing Joni back in as a continuing story. I am involved right now in writing about Larry's wife that he met there, and his old rodeo friend who became a reporter. I'm kind of writing about her life up until the time that she ended up getting married to Larry. But it all ends kind of different in a lot of respects. Larry and his previous wife, who had passed away, Eve, used to play the piano together quite a bit. And it kind of sits down on Thanksgiving evening when Dee Dee asked who played the piano. And his Eve's mother would say, well, that's Larry. So it kind of brings in, for the first time in 4 or 5 years, 6 years or whatever, Larry sits down on the piano and starts playing some of the most beautiful music in the world. It's kind of a neat ending to a different life along the line.
It's a remarkable story, and once you start reading it, you will be hooked from the very first chapter, and you will want to continue to read the book, and it's laid out so well. And I want to talk about that in a second, but let's go a few minutes left here. I want to talk about free time and what you did and what you do now. I'm still fascinated by this, the fly fishing, the hunting, team roping in the shadows of the Sawtooth Ridge. Tell us some of the experiences and team roping. I'm not familiar with that. What exactly is team roping?
Team roping is where two people rope a steer. One takes the head, one takes the heels. Normally up in Montana where we used to do it, we'd all put $10 into the pot, and the first two that had the best time ended up taking the pot home that evening. So it's I've been on horses for years. I even had horses out here. My son that flies for Alaska, he's one of the top quarter horse trainers in the nation. And I love cutting. I enjoyed cutting. It gives you an out. It's a great sport. It really is. And you mix with good people too in that sport.
You know, it's so fascinating, your background and the story, The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge by Bernie McAuley, our guest on the program. You've got the various stories of backgrounds of the people that you talk about, Larry, the POW. We've got the time frame. It's almost like a mini history lesson as you're reading the Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. How do you take these different stories and put them together to make it one book, in this case, The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge? What were the challenges in taking all of these components and putting them together?
Outlining your work to begin with. I never really looked at that until now, or when I'm writing these books. It kind of gives you a time frame through the years and so forth. And then going back, Desert Storm, I had to do a little bit of investigating. The airlines, of course, I've known the airlines. I've known people that commute a lot. In Montana, for instance, we have several airline pilots that have ranchers out there in Montana. That and the area which we're talking about in the Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge, David Letterman has a home up there in that area.
Oh, I knew it was Montana. I didn't know it was that area there.
Yeah, it's up in that area. It's good fly fishing. It's the best fly fishing in the world. And I still do a little bit of fly fishing out here in Washington when I'm out here once in a while. But I still enjoy going back to Montana and dipping the fly into the Bitterroot or into the Clark Fork. Or I did a 144-mile canoe trip on the Missouri River following Lewis and Clark's expedition here a few years back. And then we did another 70-mile river run on the Flathead River out of down towards the Clark Fork River a few years back. So,
well, that's amazing.
I love history. It's just being able to follow in those tracks, and you kind of pick up your stories along those routes.
Yeah, just sort of listening, absorbing as well, and then writing these stories down. And it obviously keeps you young as well, a whole different outlook on life when you're out in nature and enjoying what you get to enjoy there. What do you hope the takeaway is when the reader reads The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge? They've got a story there, but so many different layers to it. What do you hope we take away from reading the book? Feelings
for one another, feelings.
Yes.
Bringing back those feelings of our high school time, college time, or whatever. But looking back over life, and all of a sudden it's becoming part of you. Similar to Dee Dee, for instance, and her life prior to after college, and her beginning to write herself as a newspaper person. It's hard to say. I'm kind of, somebody explained it to me that your book is kind of like a Hallmark movie. And that's kind of like what I would like to have it be.
Yeah, that's a compliment.
To a Hallmark movie.
And now that you mention it, it does fall in that category. You've got these elements there, and again, you talk about issues such as PTSD with great compassion. You've got the interaction, the relationships, a slice of history in there. It is so well done. The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge, working with the Reader's Magnet, and that's one of the areas one of the websites where you can get information on the book, readersmagnet.com. They're there with you, taking the book out into the public. What's it been like working with Reader's Magnet?
Well, I've been working mostly with, I believe her name is Rhea, and she's been really good and bringing me up to date on everything as they planned them and so forth. Some of the items I'm not too crazy about, but like they talked me into going down to Tucson, Arizona to a book signing, not only a book signing, but it was a book fair that was down there. And it was listening to other authors as they go through their books and so forth. And to me, I've got a lot of work to do myself. So fortunately, I have a good editor who lives a few doors up, and he's a psychologist, and he's going through some of these books. He said, "I don't believe you, Bernie. I don't believe you."
Well, that's such a fantastic story, your life story, as well as this book, The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. Bernie McAuley, that's McAuley. If you're Googling his website, very simple, BernieMcAuleyBooks.com. You'll get information on the upcoming book that Bernie has as the follow-up. It'll be out very soon. Book, of course, at Amazon, all of the usual places. Bernie, a pleasure having you on the program, talking about your past. I love what you've, the lifetime that you lived and continue to live. Love what you've done with Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge. Thank you for spending some time with us on the program.
Thanks for inviting me. And as I said on the next book, it's Joni's story, the daughter's story. So hopefully we'll see it within the next month or so.
That will be fantastic, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that as well. It's been a pleasure to have Bernie McAuley, our guest on the program, McAuley. The book, The Shadows of Sawtooth Ridge, book available usual places, and his website, BernieMcAuleyBooks.com. You'll find all of this and a direct link by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. We're back on today's program right after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, associate producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, segment producer. Ben Watson, webmaster. Otto Bechet, director of engineering and TV production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, executive producer of This Week in America.